Hello, me from the future, or you from now? I want to make a video talking about Trip because I write too much when it comes to stuff like this, and I'm not particularly good at writing. It turns out that the guy who makes games isn't good at writing. Wow. And I want to try something new in terms of documenting it in a video, so sure, Trip. Man. I would start off with saying how we got here. Roll the time back to when I was in high school, graduating from high school, right out of the COVID hell, and I wanted to make a game. Crazy. The entirety of high school I actually wanted to make a game, and learning new skills, where I first get introduced to things like Blender and Unity and game design. Crazy stuff. And we had a game design club because of it, and nothing really ever came from this game design club, as anytime we'd want to create an ideas or something, it would immediately go out of scope. And, turns out that a bunch of high school students in a club are not able to make a AAA, AA, whatever title you want to call it. Yeah, especially completely ranging from skill levels of, I've never touched a game design program to my life, to, yeah, I know what C# is. So yeah, no, that was never going to work. So I wanted to create a game that started off with nothing. My response to feature creep and overdoing it was to do nothing at all in terms of planning. You can't plan to go overboard if you just start working. That was the sentiment, right? And I started Trip off with a paragraph that I cannot find to this day that basically said, I want a game that focuses on movement. That's it. It's going to be a simple game. It's going to be trippy because that's what my 3D modeling styles was anchored towards at the time. And I'm going to do it by myself, and I want to see where this takes me. I am now 4 years into college. Man, I'm old as shit. But yeah, that's 4 years later, here's where I am. So this is what I came up with. All right, Trip was what was done out of that idea. Trip 1 was cool and a complete pile of mess. Trip 2 was cooler, but still incomplete and a complete mess. And then Trip 3 is the coolest, cool enough to actually share out to the rest of the world, but still not complete. And if looked at basically any critical eye, also still a pile of mess. So I want to actually document a video and take a step back and actually look into why Trip is like this. what got me here? Why is it bad? And why is it good? And that is a good point. Why is it good? Before talking about the real technical parts of Trip, I want to say that going into this, I was initially very sad about Trip and the state that it's in. There's so many ideas that all tried to come together. For the most part, especially towards the middle and the end of the game, really do come together in a very cohesive way. It's really hard to let go, after even working on a small section of this project for a week or something. It's really difficult to say, or to look back at that week and say, even though we worked on it, nothing came of it. And letting go of past work, leaves it makes it very difficult to be initially positive of Trip. The main issue that especially Trip 3 is dealing with is how to teach the player how to play the game. This definitely took a toll, trying to iterate so many times on such a basic concept of show the player how the game is played. As we'll go more deeper into it, you'll understand that the game is pretty complicated in a way that requires you to understand the baseline mechanics and the baseline systems of what you're doing, just pressing buttons and moving. It's difficult to teach without a giant paper, without sitting the player down and saying, this is how you do A, this is how you do B. And I really didn't want to do that because I didn't want a super long, drawn out tutorial that was probably really, in my head at least, really boring on how to do basic movement. Most games, you don't really need a tutorial teaching you how to press WASD, but looking back on it, I definitely should have, just to make sure that there isn't any bases missing. Especially because, I did want the game to feel a little cryptic. In a sense, the game is called Trip and completely in black and white, so, and partially a puzzle. I wanted players to figure out how to move through whatever level they're given, and only through repetition would they be able to beat a level. It's very difficult to beat any of the levels in the game first try without either backtracking or restarting, and that was the way I wanted it to be, at least in concept. Looking forward, if I ever make a Trip 4, that's definitely going to change. Before getting into the mistakes I made while making the game and the things that I learned that were also pretty cool, I want to lay a groundwork for the game's mechanics, because even playing the game, you might not have realized some of these things were intentional mechanics. That is just the nature of the game, I guess. But starting from the top, going down, momentum build-up. In this game, this is a first-person platformer, right? And so in a liminal space with a bunch of gray boxes everywhere that you're supposed to walk around and try to find the end of the level on, you build up momentum. And it's a little weird in the way that it works, where the momentum that you build up is kind of like sliding in a sense. So think of it like, you walk around and then you slide for a little bit after you stop moving, or after you stop inputting a button press. But if you just stop moving, the sliding will come to a stop. But if you stop moving and then start moving again, very quickly, the slide will keep going. It'll the sliding won't stop in the direction that you just are attempting to slide in. And this is the entire basis for the perfect movement system that I called it, where essentially you build up this potential, right? You build up this momentum, and when you go to exert this momentum and you keep moving after, you'll get what's called perfect movement, where you can start moving faster, right? So if you're moving forward and you let go and you start sliding forward again, and then you repress it just to keep moving forward, you now have that slide going with you on top of you just moving forward, and that will send you forward even faster. And if you do it on a very specific timing, the slide will be bigger, the momentum buildup will be bigger, and that is what is perfect movement. Teaching this to players was basically impossible. I've tried 4 different ways that all essentially revolve around how do I explain this to my player through text, and then to even a point of locking off another section of the map until they're able to reach a certain speed using this mechanic. I don't think this is enough. Personally, if I was going to do it again, I definitely have to come up with a better solution in terms of how to teach the player that is what is actually happening, right? And because, this is momentum and it's building up, right? If you build up your momentum going forward, and then you want to all of a sudden go left, you're going in a diagonal angle because all of your momentum was built up going forward and you're trying to use it to go left. And that was the interesting thing, right? Is that this is a game that you want to go as fast as possible to beat the level in the shortest amount of time, but your momentum can act against you if you're not careful with it. And this was the other bonus of using perfect movement, is that if you time the momentum properly, if you let go of the button, repress it properly, you can actually just change all of your momentum. Go from having all of your momentum go, let's say, forward and now left. And this was supposed to be the trade-off, right? The skill that you're able to develop in the game is that if your timing is good enough, the entire, basically, laws of physics don't apply to you. It's supposed to be cool. But yeah, and it's a mechanic that I think really, from at least a level 1 perspective, separates this game from anything else, right? Because it's just a game about movement, where movement itself requires now perfect timings and understanding of the building of momentum. I think it's fun. So the next thing is momentum stop. So it's the ability where the player at any point in time can just halt all momentum and just completely come to a full stop including in midair, which will lead to basically like this feather falling effect if you hold it. And it's just done by holding A and D, right? So if you try to wiggle really fast, your momentum just like completely stops. This was a system used mainly so that you can have better control over the positioning of the player and with the trade-off being speed, right? And I really did enjoy this. And like this system was, or this mechanic was difficult for players to initially get their hands on, but as the people testing the game continued on, they understood, oh, this mechanic is actually really useful so that you can properly control where you're going, right? And always allows essentially saying you can always overshoot because the moment you think you're too far, you can just stop. Yeah, it makes movement itself now just require more thought and require more inputs from the player, which was exactly what I wanted, right? I want to make a game where all you do is move, and how do you make movement itself interesting? All of that was just moving with WASD and did nothing else. And jumping is a whole new world, man. So moving in the air was a very weird point when I first started making the game, because I wanted the game to still feel grounded, right? You're not flying through the air. This is still like a game that is mainly taking place on the ground, meaning that there has to be some sort of way to make moving in the air more difficult. And essentially, the way the jumping works is, if you press space, you jump. Crazy. But if you commit to a direction before you jump, it's like think of it like a forward leap instead of just a jump. So you go forward even faster than if you were just sprays and then forward. And even though it might sound intuitive, the way that physics works is like, oh yeah, if I jump and then move forward, I'm going to move forward more than if I move forward and then start a jump, right? Like that's just the way physics works. No, but specifically in this game, it is a much bigger push forward if you're holding forward before the jump. And that was very intentional. It's like twice the distance essentially, just by tapping jump before you move forward. And that was kind of the idea of committal jumps, where you now have another angle to control the direction that you're going when you're jumping. It also makes the game feel faster, because when players are jumping from, let's say, one block to another block, or like one platform to another platform forward, you can really feel how much further forward you're going, versus, oh, there's a platform right above me, I want to go get that platform right above me. And that's kind of the idea of conditional or committal jumps. And on top of that, you can still strafe in the air, so to speak, so you can still move a little bit in the air, but in the case of committal jumps, the strafing that you are trying to do after deciding what direction you want to jump is much higher than if you, like, say, jump forward and then try to move left and right. And this was sort of, I hope I'm doing a better job of explaining the purpose of it, where if you press a button, then you jump, you move forward a lot more than if you would just jump and then try to move forward a little bit, sort of like try to air movement your way out of it. And then there's also a difference between like a grounded jump and an air jump. In this game, the player has two jumps, and they work completely differently depending on if you're in the air, if you're on the ground, and if you are falling. Jumping isn't supposed to be a tool to completely reset your downwards momentum. It can help, but it doesn't reset it. And this was due to perfect movement. So instead of having the player press jump to like use their second jump to essentially stop moving in the air, that's what momentum stopping is for. So if you momentum stop, you hold all movement in the air, and then you can momentum stop into a jump that can, stop your momentum and then give you a little boost up, right? But the issues with momentum stopping is that you also stop your horizontal momentum as well. So if a player is like trying to make a jump and they're just about to make it and they just need to get a little bit higher and they try to use momentum stop into jump, if their target is still like a little bit further out, they're just not making that. And that's where perfect movement comes in, where if you perfect move in the air, it also halts all downward vertical movement. So it's kind of like you reset your gravity for a split second before it continues without changing your horizontal movement. And this is the reason why the air jump, when used falling down, basically does nothing. It's a little bit, but basically does nothing to actually change how fast you're falling, compared to if you were already ascending and then use your second jump, you'll ascend even higher. And this was kind of like the tree I wanted to build out with air movement, right? With just movement in general. So you have your normal WASD, and you can then use to build up momentum, both in ground or in air. You have momentum stops to stop you from overcommitting or overshooting. Then you also have committal jumps and non-committal jumps to help you, or to have more horizontal distance while in the air. That has to be committed to before you decide to jump, so you need to think about it before you plan on jumping to the next platform, right? On top of options that you can do in the air to sort of give you an extra nudge that is not as simple as just press the space bar again. Because of this, like, you kind of need to commit pretty early or not, whether you're going to do a double jump or a single jump, or a jump, wait a little bit, and then a jump, or let's say a jump, perfect movement, and then another jump, right? Like, these decisions make for completely different forms of movement. Then, like, understanding that this is just how we move and how we jump and how we interact with the air with a double jump, I then introduced sprinting into the game. And the sprinting works by having what I call like a breath bar or breath meter on the sides of the screen. And yeah, if you sprint, you use up resource, and if you jump while sprinting, the jump goes higher and you use up even more resource. It's about a third of the meter. And doing this, right, combining all of the mechanics essentially says that your sprints are essentially like a mini install for your jumps, right? They can, while sprinting on the ground definitely makes you move a little faster, because the way momentum build up in the game is better than just sprinting. You can use momentum build up plus perfect movement plus sprinting to move even faster on the ground, but sprint jumping is such a enormous boost to your jumps that it essentially kind of allows you to fly for a little bit. Because of this, that's the reason why sprint jumping takes up so much meter and why the meter is so short, because it's supposed to be used sparingly and purposefully. I didn't want it to just be like, yes, you're just supposed to be holding down shift the entire game. No. You're supposed to be holding down shift when you think you're about to make something and need like an extra little push that you know you're going to need, outside of perfect movement, outside of committal jumps, outside of the second jump. And it can kind of essentially be like a build your own distance, build your own jump kind of game that I really enjoyed the fact that like the player would have to think out through. So now that we have perfect movement, momentum stops, conditional jump, air strafing, sprinting, sprint jumps, sprint committal jumps, there's then wall riding and wall vaulting. Wall riding is pretty self-explanatory. I didn't do anything too crazy there. If you stand next to a wall rideable, or like a wall that can be rided on, right? Not every wall can be rided on, just the darker ones. And you move forward, well, you'll start riding on it. There is some small mechanics there where, depending on the direction that you're facing, you can change how fast you're going on the wall. Like if you are facing into the wall, you'll go a little slower. But if you're looking parallel to the wall, or even a little slightly away from it, that is the fastest speed that you can go on said wall. On top of that, after wall riding, there's also wall vaulting, where essentially, if you're riding a wall and you start to look away from the wall, you'll essentially just basically hop off of it. But you can vault off the wall by pressing space while wall riding, and it'll give you a bit of a vertical, but it's really more a horizontal boost in whatever direction you're already facing, sort of as a push off the wall, and it also gives you an extra jump so that you can choose if you want a little bit more verticality when you wall vault. And the last two mechanics in the game were reverse gravity. Reverse gravity works by, you press Q and E and you reverse gravity, and the only real trick there is you can't reverse gravity again until you touch the ground. So if you reverse gravity while grounded, you'll get another charge of reverse gravity, so to speak, to use, because your feet are still technically touching the ground as you instantly reverse gravity. Reversing gravity meant essentially that the more verticality you have, it can be translated into horizontal positioning. If I fall really far down and then reverse gravity, I have a lot of horizontal distance I'm going to catch until I hit the ground again. And that was, it made level design definitely a lot more puzzling, a lot more challenging, to make it so that I have to include things like death boxes and stuff like that to make sure that the player can't just say, well, I'm just going to go completely under the stage or completely under the level and end up at the level finish. Also, because of reverse gravity and just a lot of other clipping shenanigans, a max velocity is in the game. There's a hard cap on how fast the player can move. The last thing in the game, which is probably the biggest one, is shine sparking. What shine sparking is essentially is that if you press WWQ, it is like a Metro style shine spark. Well, that's where it gets the name from. I wanted to implement this mainly so that the idea was that it could give the player more options in terms of movement and saying, I want to do this thing movement-wise, or I want to move here movement-wise, and attaching some sort of resource to it, right? Originally, I did have it charge up like the Metroid, where if you kept running in continuous direction, you would build up shine meter, then you would be able to use it to shine spark, mainly because I thought it'd be really cool to try to implement wave dashing into the game. The original idea for it ended up being a little too broken, where the player you had a lot of different ways to gain this meter, and to make shine sparking a thing, you have to also somehow gain the meter by landing. And that means that if you shine sparked up and then shine sparked down, consuming some part of your meter, you would regain some equal part of your meter. And to make wave dashing a thing, that had to be an equivalent part. But the issue is that in a Metroid style game where it's 2D and the walls are essentially blocking you in terms of where you can go most of the time, in a first-person platformer, I just allowed the player to shine spark in any direction that they wanted to after building up enough charge. And that creates, just like reverse gravity, very dumb outcomes. With reverse gravity, it's an issue because verticality can be turned into horizontal positioning, and that can be a little tricky. With shine sparking, it just made a lot of levels trivial. You kind of get to a point where it's just like, why jump across the section if I can just jump shine spark and be done with all of it? So yeah, because of that, shine sparking was switched to a meter where you can gain it by wall riding or by having or after landing after air time. So it would give you meter based on how long you were in the air. This change was pretty good. It made shine sparking and wall riding flow together very well as a mechanic, and also made motivated players to just be airborne more, even if it was a bad idea to be in the air. Essentially, to have precise and fast movement, you want to be on the ground, but to gain the most meter, you want to be on the air. And it makes it so that players actually, when dealing with the situation, sort of have a choice to make. If you don't need the meter, then you shouldn't need to be in the air. Watching people come up with different solutions to different levels based off of this dynamic was definitely really fun to see. And so, while shine sparking is the last mechanic that was in the game, there's also another mechanic that was in the game that ended up getting scrapped. It's still there if you go to the test level, but it was the ability to create walls. I'm not going to go too deep into it because it's no longer in the game, but it was very fun and very dumb, and looking back on it, definitely shouldn't have fought as hard as I did to try to keep it as part of the game, but it was there and definitely added to the discussion in terms of Why is shine sparking an input versus having more inputs in the game? Oh, and the answer to that question, by the way, is shine sparking is still like a combination of key presses. One, so that it's harder to spam and really just kind of makes the entire action feel more intentional. Okay, so this is the part about level design. All of the abilities and movement options in the game were designed apart from the levels, right? I didn't really have much of a plan going into this, so something as complicated as designing a moveset built for a level was not in mind. It was more or less, alright, we now have a really cool basis. How do we want to leverage the levels to make use of that basis? And to also, like, teach the player how to play the game. I would say part of the issues was that I never really settled on how I wanted the exact feel and how far you jump, how fast you move with the game until the first level was really designed, and really didn't completely settle on it until closer to the end of the development. So the first couple levels were definitely like a challenge, because I still wanted the levels themselves to be a bit like puzzles, right? You can't really have a trippy game with just movement alone. The other big issue is that with iterative design and hindsight also being 2020 with the levels, it was that after enough passes on the same problem, really just trying to tackle the how do I teach the player the basic just WASD movements, right? It's not as bad with the options that require different key presses or different button presses. Wall riding is pretty understandable to get your hands on, including wall vaulting, but all the other niche sort of mechanics like intentional jumps or committal jumps and perfect movement were definitely I never was able to solve them even with the level design, and that's probably the biggest issue with the game. Also the fact that I didn't think about sound design, but that's besides the point. So yeah, I kind of wanted to go level by level and see what I liked about it, see what I didn't like about it, and really try to put down on paper what was the issue. Okay, so the initial issue with level 1 was that it was too slow / long. First iteration of level 1 was kind of similar to the first one. It's actually still in the game, but you go into this big open area, climb up a bunch of floating platforms, travel down a pipe into like another section that was essentially a bunch of floating stairs in like a circular pattern. So the puzzle there was that the path that you're supposed to take, or floating platform, so the puzzle there was that the path that you're supposed to take was not clear, and it was only to seeing which jumps you can make and which jumps you can't make to like sort of build that into the player there. And really try to teach the committal and non-committal jump features that I kind of thought that players would be able to feel it, but I don't think, especially seeing people play, it doesn't seem like that was something that they felt was a thing. On top of perspective, right? This is a first-person game, and gauging distance in first person can be a bit difficult, especially when it comes to precision. And on top of that, it was also kind of slow. Initially with level 1, I didn't introduce sprinting, and because of that, just walking the entire pace of level 1 felt like you're moving pretty slow. And the fact that I made all of these levels in Blender and then ported them into Unity, and I didn't like make any of the parts modular, made it really difficult to try to adjust the sense of scale or the positioning of basically any of the platforms, especially for level 1. Level 1's importing was like 3 main parts, right? Like, so the floating platforms when you first exit out like the little cave is all one model, and then the circular stairs were also all one model, and then the floating platforms in the final part of level 1 is also all one model, with the exit being another model itself. I should have split up the models, but yeah, hindsight is 2020. So because of that, in seeking out a new level 1 to teach the player everything up to sprinting, because to deal with the slowness problem, I was just going to say, fuck it, introduce sprinting now, and get rid of the like floating staircases, because the issue is that with sprinting and sprint jumping, more importantly, it made the entire circular staircase trivial. There was no puzzle there. You just jump up, and it probably felt kind of pointless, especially because it wasn't like it wasn't like an art piece that I was like trying to focus the player on. It was just, here's a challenge. So yeah, I decided to give the player the ability to sprint, and it speeds up everything else, along with the starting steps of level 1 being a lot easier, right? So they're a little less infuriating when, if you fall down, you can get back up in like 2 sprint jumps or something. It's probably like 3. And also implemented like the floating orbs throughout the game around this time when I wanted to redo level 1, just to also guide the player's steps. But yeah, so trying to redo level 1, I came across what's the current level 1 implementation with the timed maze. And the timed maze was actually based off of the original Donkey Kong. And that was like the inspiration of the first level. I was stuck on level design, so I was like, great, what worked in history? And then I saw Donkey Kong, and I was just like, nah, I could do it. That is also the reason why it is a floating monkey in the middle of the screen. And that is also like, the level layout is identical to the original N64 Donkey Kong. Because previously I didn't really teach perfect movement very explicitly. Neither did I teach conditional jumping or the ideas of speed and speed control. I kind of just assumed the player would get it. This first level is very difficult for most people. And I think it was another thing is that difficult and confusing, even though we use them interchangeably, or at least I was using them interchangeably, difficult and confusing are 2 different things. And level 1, I'd like to say, is difficult because it was confusing. And while confusing was part of the game, right? So when a couple testers first had trouble playing the game, what I was saying essentially to myself in my head was, yeah, it's a hard game. Not truly realizing that the issue was confusion, not difficulty, or the fact that the difficulty itself was caused by the confusion. That is why level 0 was created. Yeah, the initial creation for the game started off with level 1, and then I decided to say, screw it, alright, the second like full-on complete pass of level 1 was not it. I obviously need to spend more time teaching the player the basic mechanics, so I'm going to create a level 0 that is going to do that. In my head at the time especially, it was just going to be here's a quick fix on how to play the basic game. There's no real need to make this any difficult or to spend a lot of time on it. It's very simple, and we'll move on to the cooler and better parts of the game. And that was definitely the wrong approach to take. Looking back now, I definitely should have spent more time easing the player into the base mechanics. And level 0, even though it was an attempt, didn't get the players over the initial hump. It definitely helped. All right, I'll give myself that, but it didn't do it. Yeah, at that point I had bigger fish to fry with trying to finish the last part of the game, and quite frankly, like, was very aggravating. Every single time I tried to make a new part of the game, I always come back to level 1, just looking at me being like, well, the players didn't understand what was going on in level 3 or 4 per se, because they never truly had a good grasp of level 1. And just making it like a initial hurdle was not the best choice. Okay, so this leads us on to level 0. So level 0, as I said before, was a band-aid for the bullet hole left by level 1 in all of the players that I had tried out. The basic point of level 1 was that it was supposed to be it was supposed to be like a box that the player would have to reach a certain speed in before continuing on, which would then lead to a staircase that you had to fall through one of the gaps and finish the level like that. This was supposed to lock the player basically out the rest of the game until they were able to understand at least some part of the momentum system, and then serve as a small step into explaining sprint jump, or like implied sprint jumping, sprinting, and all of the different movement options that can come from that. So the puzzle aspect of this was that you didn't know that you're supposed to, is that if you weren't looking at the orbs, which most people weren't, and you reached the top of the staircase, and then you would see that there was nothing there. If you fell off, you would then see the rest of the level and see how it's supposed to be played, and understand that you're supposed to fall through one of the steps. And that was supposed to be like, oh, aha, a simple got you for level 0. Keep it moving, right? But yeah, most players didn't see the tip for perfect, or didn't read the tip for perfect sprinting, and if they read it, they didn't understand it. They didn't pay attention to any of the floating orbs. Initially, the floating orbs spiraled into the center and then followed the path the player was supposed to take, and it seems like the spiraling towards the center made it so that players just ignored them, thinking that they're just ornamental or something, and didn't see the path that they were supposed to take at all. Nor did the players really understand another core feature of the game, which is that when you collide with the walls, they stop you. They stop all your momentum. In a game about precision, granted this wasn't intended, but then was worked into the rest of the game. Initially, right, that's a bug. If the player ran into the wall, they would just be stuck on essentially sliding up against that wall, and they wouldn't be able to really accelerate because any force would be stopped by that wall. And I kind of kept this in mind when designing the future levels, where essentially players are rarely meant to like be right next to a wall, and if they do, then they are either doing something to, cause that themselves. Essentially, walls are not your friend. And I made a mechanic around that or not a mechanic, but an effect around it where if the player, lost all of their momentum due to touching a wall, walls are not your friend, would flash onto the screen and then fade out with a somewhat disorienting effect. The disorienting effect initially was kind of made as a joke to kind of be like, how far could I actually take this? And after playing it with it myself, I kind of got used to it, and then showing it off to other people, even though I had to tone down a bit how disorienting it was, but it turned out to be like a very good deterrent in explaining the point that the walls are not your friend. People's complete lack of seeing the puzzle, aggravated me to no end with level 0. Level 0 also went through a couple different changes, but the final product for level 0 is... that was when I basically kind of like conceded the point and put it in the videos for the rest of the game, just to really just say that here's the way you're supposed to do the level. I wanted to let them figure it out for the most part, but then it got to a point where it was just like, it felt like I couldn't figure out any other design decision to really help out the player instead of except just giving them the answer flat out. And the main takeaways being that if I was ever going to like redo or come back to this is like just a large issue I'm going to have to tackle. Yeah, no, it's just there. I guess the idea right now is that like if I could have some sort of like timed mechanic where it's like you reach some sort of checkpoint, and if you you reach some sort of trigger box, and if you don't reach a certain checkpoint in time, it'll send you back to the trigger box, and you'll just keep doing it until you're fast enough to get to the next checkpoint. Something like that is able to passively tells the player you need to be going faster and doesn't involve completely restarting the level or being completely stuck where you don't know what you're supposed to do. Giving the player a sense of direction, including, where the player ends up facing when they complete some sort of section, is something that level 0 and in combination with level 1 really was just like, yeah, this is a big issue. Now to the part of the game that is a lot better in every sense of the way. Level 2 is pretty good for the most part design-wise. The main issue when designing it was level 2 starts off with trying to teach the player how to wall ride, and you wall ride and then hop over a wall into the next section of the level, and the wall height was very difficult for most people to understand because what you're meant to do is sprint jump to the top of the wall and then have enough vertical momentum after the wall vault to get over it, and people didn't like, it didn't click for people that you're supposed to go higher up on the wall to get over the first part of the level. Yeah, because of it, it was kind of a design point, because if the wall was too low, they could just ignore the entire wall riding part and just jump over it. And even with lowering the wall and just conceding the point that somebody could probably just sprint jump over this with the proper timing and the committal jump, people seem to like the first part of the level and pretty understand it pretty easily once the wall was a little lower. The elevator on the first part is also very janky. It turns out that a lot of things in the game that are janky are afterthoughts, and the elevator was one as well. The issue is that initially with the stairs that are there, they would constantly trigger the walls are not your friend flash. You would just see that all the way up the stairs. It was kind of disorienting. So the quick fix to that was the elevator, and it sort of worked-ish. A better elevator implementation is something I would definitely work on if I was going to come back to it. But other than that, I really enjoyed how after the stairs, almost every player like took a pause to realize what the next part was trying to show them, and then once it clicked for them was like either visual or audible, like, oh, so this is what we're doing, and then had to at least give it a couple attempts. But it was a little like iffy because you need to understand how wall vaulting works, and I'm not sure if people understood that. There's definitely like a lot of confusion on how to wall vault or how to get on the wall itself, because if you're on a wall and you're holding space, you'll immediately wall vault off of it, and understanding that was not easy for some players. That you need to let go of space right on the wall with just W, and then when you're ready to vault off of the wall, look in a direction that is away from the wall and then vault off of it. Also, due to wall vaulting, there's some tricks that you can do that can allow you to vertically go up a wall, which is not by design. By design, you're supposed to start sliding off a wall if you're on it for too long, but for the most part, it works by design, and most players are able to complete it by design. Yeah, no, level 2 is pretty cool. The only other slight thing about level 2 actually is that initially, in the last part of the level, or the second part of the level, after you see the stairs and you start hopping from wall to wall, you could hop on top of one of the walls. Because of this, it would also just trivialize the, wall vaulting part. And to fix that, wall-rideable walls do not count as ground anymore. And that leads to a very interesting interaction when it comes to the level 4 and level 5. Gravity doesn't stop applying itself. And you can have some very funny scenes, but I don't think most people will find those kinds of interactions, because finding them by accident is pretty difficult to do, except for the boss level, but besides the point. So, on to level 3. Level 3 is tied for my second favorite level. I don't have too many notes on level 3, and really a lot of the later levels, just because they are my favorite in terms of the player response, in terms of the way that they were designed. Everything about them, everything about the next couple levels are pretty good. So, tied for my second favorite level. And this is the level that we introduce reverse gravity to the player, and it starts off slow, oh, there's a platform up there, but the platform in front of me is too far away to reach, and then it's just like, oh, reverse gravity, get onto the other platform, and then, oh, reverse gravity off. Seeing that the elevator, and seeing how there's like definitely different spots where you're supposed to wait and understand and just kind of soak in the scenery. Definitely the elevator portion where the rest of the map or level is revealed to you. I really enjoy that. I really enjoy combining the game aspect, and also some of the scenes that I'm trying to set up here are just like art pieces by themselves. Like if I screenshot them, this is the art piece that I want to show for this game. So yeah, no, level 3 is great. If I had to really be critical of it, you can skip a lot of level 3 using perfect momentum, and I'd probably want to figure out some sort of different way to enforce getting to one part of level 3 before the next. Probably using like a time loop or something like that. And because I did want them to jump on the smaller platform, reverse gravity, and then reverse gravity again to get onto the actual like moon part of it that's wall rideable, hop down, and then figure out some way to then get to the level end. I'm not too worried about people exploiting the level when they've already seen most of it and understand like the main core of it. You know, it's one thing to skip an entire level, and it's another thing to just skip maybe the last 2 steps of it. So those are definitely tweaks, but tweaks, there we go, but not something I'm too worried about. Level 4, I would say, is definitely like my favorite level. And this is the level that I introduced shine sparking, and I really enjoy. So while the initial part of the level definitely needs some work on how I show the player how to shine spark, everyone's reaction to shine sparking and how the level wants you to shine spark has been pretty good, because initially, right, you're kind of left off into this basically empty room with rideable walls around it, so you build up shine meter, and you're just like, oh, this is how I do it. And to get onto the rest of the level, you need to do a wall ride and then wall vault onto the other side of the wall after jumping off of it. It's kind of like doing a U-turn midair, but there's no ground below you, so you actually have to use shine sparking as a mechanic, because if you wall vault, you wall vault away from the wall into the void. And yeah, I really enjoy the fact that they have to actually at least use the mechanic to continue on somewhat. And then it's just a series of walls that have to shine spark to, and then shine spark around to get to the next wall. And even though this is a little tedious, some other times around players are able to realize there are some walls in this like little section you can just skip. Using shine spark, and especially with reverse gravity. And then it leads up to something I'd want to be a little bit clearer, but I'm not even sure what I'd call it, but like this rain of walls. And this one like definitely has like the best flow state in the game, period. Going from wall to wall, thinking on the fly, and then being able to sort of have to make your decisions on the fly like that is, yeah, definitely like the best part about this game, probably ever. Shine sparking is a really cool mechanic. Granted, I would say that all the mechanics in my game are really cool, because, you know, who wants to say I came up with a bad idea, but shine sparking was definitely it for sure. That leads on to the last level and the boss level for the showcase demo. I still don't know what to call this project. Is it a game? Is it a demo? Is it a proof of concept? Is it somewhere in between? I don't know. But yeah, so especially considering the timeline of things, right? About a year or so in, everything up to level 3 is done. And it's probably been like a good 3-ish years before, after starting the game, that level 4 and 5 get worked on. And at this point, I have a pretty good understanding of what works and what doesn't work. And that's why level 4 and 5 are definitely, definitely like much better levels, especially compared to like level 0 and 1. And the boss level kind of wanted to just be the showcase of the entire game, right? So level 5 really just wants to put together everything shown in the entire game and be the only real sort of enemy unit. There was like some concepts that I was playing around with, especially if it like came to expanding the game and story, right? Where the game is very dull and very quiet in terms of like the environment, and there really isn't like much personality to the game. When I say personality, I don't mean like style, but because there is definitely like an art direction when it came to the entirety of the game, but well, a resemblance of an art direction, all right? But there isn't any personality. It feels very cold, you know? And this is the only time that like any other moving sort of, at least you can identify as living thing you interact with in the game, well, that you can at least see, of course. So yeah, section 1, I could have done a better room on like the throne room vibe-ish, Really just starting the player a little bit back and then having them walk forward a bit more would have probably been pretty nice. But other than that, section 1 is pretty good. Section 2 and the rest of the boss is kind of suffered from the issue of I never really... In section 1, you're just kind of wading through all the attacks, and then it's just like, oh, don't get hit by the giant dark orb, or don't get hit by the giant dark orb that's coming from the ground. Okay, that makes sense. In section 2 and section 3, I never really explained that you have to shine spark to deal damage, like you use up your shine spark meter to deal damage, and that, especially in section 2, when the boss reverses gravity, that was the cue that they're shooting at you. Granted, this all has to do with the fact that, like, using better audio cues would definitely have helped. But, yeah, I really just forgot to address the fact that you are supposed to shine spark to deal damage. Oh, well, yeah, there ain't too much to explain there. Also, the health bar, I think, should probably be red of the boss to stand out a little bit better in the black and white world, because there were some players who just didn't even realize the boss had a health bar, and I can't really blame them. Definitely some audio cues would definitely be help, and that the visual cue of reversing the boss reversing your gravity in level 2 definitely like adds some tension, right? Because you can only generate shine spark by landing or wall riding, and if the boss reverses gravity, it's going to take you longer to land. But if you're riding on a wall, you'll get hit. So I really enjoy that sort of push and pull from part 2. Part 3, and then the final part of the boss, part 3, I definitely like the fact that it's like the last gotcha moment of the game, where essentially you have this rain of walls that you're supposed to avoid the bottom and the top of, right? And it's just like, okay, the player's seen this before, they're familiar with this, and the walls are closing in. It's just like, okay, we can deal with this. And then, instead of death boxes coming from the top and the bottom, they then come from the left and the right, and then from the back and the front. And then it just keeps repeating that until the boss is eventually dead. And the top and the bottom, most people are able to be like, okay, I understand this pretty intuitively. The left and the right, I'm like, okay, I get it. And most people just die from the front and the back one because they didn't see it coming, and it's too fast for them to react. Because, at this point in time, you're probably closer to the edge event now. So it's one of those nice, oh, I see what's going on moments in the boss level. But yeah, no, the boss was great. Well, because level 4 and level 5 were done so far out after the initial conception of the game, a lot of my 3D modeling skills had deteriorated greatly because, well, it's literally been years since I had to touch Blender again. And so it was actually a really cool deep dive into like how you're supposed to learn traditional art and like the human form, and getting back into Blender, because a nice thing I like to say is like, just because you know how to use Blender doesn't mean you know anything about art, and that it goes both ways, right? Granted, when you know both, it really shows if you know something about art and something about Blender and able to take artistic concepts and actually apply them, but not for me. So I had to do a little bit of learning, and that was pretty cool. It took me a month or so to actually like finish the boss character, and over that time was just near daily practice and research about how do you draw people with Blender drills riddled in there. So by the time I wanted to make the final boss, even though it's not perfect because nothing in this game is, it was at least something that I could accept. Man, that was the final level. I'm kind of happy on the way that it turned out. Alright, it's the end. I did the thing where I talked about the entirety of the game, what I thought was cool, what I thought was didn't, and yeah, I did it. I reviewed the game. Yippee. But yeah, in all seriousness, I should be happy with what I did. It is a pretty impressive thing to look at, especially for someone who's never seen any of my work or anything about me. It's like, man, you did all this by yourself? Yes. The models, the coding, and it is a unique skill set that I should be more happy about. I just, this project isn't up to what I wanted it to be, and it does hurt, yeah, the fact that this was all done is something that I should be more happy about, but it's not perfect, and it's really far from perfect, and it's not even like problems that can be like, you can fix that later. No. These are like pretty big problems I need to deal with how the game was designed and then made, right? But talking to more people has really let me realize that it's okay to move on from a project that you're not fulfilled with, because we do need to move on and do other things with our lives, and realizing that is pretty difficult, and I should be okay with that. I should be okay with that. There's nothing stopping me from coming back in the future and working on like a trip 4, so to say. But the fact that it's still on my summer bucket list of things I wanted to do during summer from high school, like, man, this goes way back. Yeah, at this point I wanted to show it off to the world in its imperfected state and be like, yes, I did sort of make a game demo proof of concept thing. I still don't know what to call it. I kind of rotate between the words. I'm more comfortable with proof of concept because it does prove that the concept can be done. But like, most people look at it and call it a game, and then I'm just like, Also, game is a lot easier to explain than proof of concept. But yeah, no, with that all said, Trip 3 has now been posted on itch and uploaded a full working playthrough for anyone who doesn't want to play, and hopefully have uploaded this for anyone who wants to have a little bit deeper insight in terms of what I was thinking. And so it's really just no longer some game that I've been working on cryptically for the past couple years, and is really just something that I can say, yes, I was actually doing something with that time. Granted, I wish I could show more for it, that'd be great, but I was doing something. But yeah, with that it, have fun with Trip 3 if you play it. If you're me from the future, please do something useful. Maybe like, you probably should brush your teeth. You should definitely do that. Oh yeah, and then the sound design. We do have ears, huh? Oh yeah, no. The sound design was a complete afterthought. I put it on Trip. I put Trip on itch, and then I was like, man, this game is pretty quiet, huh? I never really realized how quiet the game is to other people, because like I'm always working on it with music in the background, and I was like, yep. There was a last-ditch effort to like try to put music in, and I then it like dawned on me that all of the problems with the game has been done are a thing because someone was lacking foresight, and the one guy working on the project then proceeded to lack foresight on sound design. I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. Yeah, I'm not dealing with this. Just ship it. Boop. But yeah, no. Anyway, but yeah, thanks for listening. You stayed the whole way through. Goodbye. And I don't know, drink water.